opinions expressed on the show are those of the guests or hosts, and not necessarily those of the advertisers, networks, platforms, or stations. Warning that the content of the show may not be suitable for all audiences, and that viewer discretion is advised. The show does not intend to provide medical, legal, or financial advice, and viewers or listeners should consult with a professional before making...
Hello, everybody out there. This is Jack Carey. I'm your host here at Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio, and we are the radio program that delves into all paranormal topics. We explore all of the crazy conspiracies going on around the world, and we find just crazy things once in a while to bring to the show and talk about. But it's been a busy week. I've been a bit under the weather this week, but it's still been a busy week in the paranormal world. It seems like these days. I remember a time way back when, and I don't want to date myself, when there weren't 100 news articles a day dealing with paranormal topics. Why that shift has taken place, I really don't know, other than perhaps it's sort of a telltale marker of humanity sort of awakening. We are in the age of Aquarius, and if you believe in ancient prophecy the way that I do, the age of Aquarius is an interesting age. It's the age when you have a resolution to a discovery of the truth of all of the secrets that have been built up in the prior age, which would have been the age of Pisces, and that was, we all know how that went. It's been a bit of a disaster. But if you follow Cliff High, Half Past Human, you know that he sort of predicts that we're coming out of the Kali Yuga. The Kali Yuga is really physically, if you're talking about it at a physical level, it's a place where the planet basically travels through a bunch of debris to make it very easy to understand. And while you're traveling through that debris, you're being blocked from all of these very special energy signals that are being sent from the center of the galaxy. When you come out of that, because of the natural movement of the planet through space, you enter into a new age. This enters into a sort of eventually a golden age appears over time as you become more and more exposed to the cosmic center of our galaxy, and the planet absorbs more and more of these cosmic rays that ends up facilitating a new age. And we're in the age of Aquarius, and what can I say? So far, we haven't been disappointed. There has been a lot of, let's say, monumental secrets out there that were that came about in the past, over the last 80 years especially, that are all being chipped away at. And a lot of that has to do with the UFO, UAP phenomenon and the disclosure battle taking place behind the scenes. I did a bit of a deep dive into Ross Coulthart this week. And for those of you unfamiliar with Ross Coulthart, he's a honored and credentialed journalist that works for News Nation that has been sort of forefront in the UAP disclosure, UFO disclosure movement. And he's got a lot of really highly credible sources and connections all through the intelligence agencies of America, and indeed people actually working within the programs that have the alien craft, the retrieved and somewhat back-engineered alien craft, and we'll be getting into that as well here at the first part of the show, because it's one of those things now where the snowball of disclosure is beginning to roll so fast that it's really turning into a bit of an avalanche. And if you've listened to Ross Coulthart this week on any of his videos that he's released, he's made some very, very interesting inroads with a new whistleblower named Jake Barber, who, let's face it, all indications are that this guy's the real deal, and that he was, for a while, the primary helicopter pilot that the United States Air Force used to retrieve alien spacecraft. Downed alien spacecraft, let's say. Let's not forget that point. And it's all very highly compartmentalized. You know, the guy that picks up the craft and delivers it to a flatbed is different than the team that takes it off the flatbed and actually delivers it to a facility, which is different than the team that takes it from that team and begins and hands it over to the scientist, which is yet another team. And so you get to see just how layered the onion of secrecy really is and how deep it really goes. Barber has made a huge splash in the UFO, UAP disclosure movement, community, whatever you want to call it, over the past week or so. And, you know, if you listen to Coulthart and the way he puts it, there's a cascade of these whistleblowers that are just about to come forward, and the one thing that they've been waiting on is a solid indication from the new administration in the White House that they really are serious about UFO disclosure. It's going to force their hand finally, and I think people are in for a real shock, which over the course of the next few months to the next couple of years even, who knows how fast they will release everything. But let's face it, this administration has put a lot of people into very high positions, and these are all people who in the past have publicly stated their desire for UFO disclosure. That is everything from the new head of the CIA to the new Secretary of State, Rubio, to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, which is our former governor here in South Dakota, and she is actually really sharp. So with her at the helm, I'm sure there's going to be at least somebody watching the gate for the barbarians to show up, you know. But this week's Paranormal in the News, or as I like to call it, our open source intelligence gathering here at the PIA, has some really interesting stuff. There is some new UFO video coming out of Britain that looks to be extremely high definition, and it's part of the ongoing, avalanche of alien craft being filmed all around the world. We talked previously about the drones. The drones are still happening. The current administration came out at their White House press conference and said that the drones had been all legally operated according to the FAA and et cetera and so on. So that's interesting, because everybody else that you see and talk to, including UAP sources, are saying that there's something else, something darker, more nefarious happening with the drones and with UAPs in general, and that some of these drones don't appear to be drones the way we understand them to be. It's interesting. Well, I'll get to that in a minute, but Blaze Media is running a new interesting article about why media all of a sudden, mainstream media, is obsessed with angels and demons. Well, that's something that could have been predicted and It's something that's going on even at the Pentagon as we speak. There are some very highly religious people in the Pentagon that have very highly secretive positions, some of them within the UAP programs, who don't want disclosure to take place because they think that it's anti-religious in some manner. And so that plays into all of this that's taking place. It's interesting because Coulthard's sources are telling him that some of these upper echelon intelligence agents that are embedded within the UAP programs are high-ranking members of the Mormon Church. That's interesting for a world-renowned journalist to say, but that's what his sources are telling him. And he doesn't know why that's the case. He thinks that maybe it has to do with the church's origins and the fact that they believe that some of those origins have to do with an alien communication that took place. I've read the Book of Mormon, and there are some very interesting passages in there that seem to depict alien technology communicating with people, that kind of a thing. So that's interesting, and perhaps plays into the whole Collins elite, which people talk about. This is the sort of underground group of highly religious people that are all connected together within these intelligence programs that think that it's all demonic in nature. Let's put it that way. So there's a new UFO documentary out there that LAD Bible is talking about. And it's going to expose a cover-up of the biggest discovery in human history. So there's a new documentary. It's called The Age of Disclosure. It's directed by Dan Farah, and it has contributions from 34 members of the U.S. government, military, and intelligence community. So, and all of them are people who claim direct knowledge. So you can see where this is going. Now online, if you follow any sort of UAP, UFO / alien forums, everywhere from Reddit to Twitter, #UFO, to pretty much anywhere that you name, there's a small but vehemently loud group of people out there who keep alive the idea that every single one of these whistleblowers are somehow a psyop and that none of this is really taking place, that this isn't really going to be disclosure, and that it's all got to be fake, and that why would they come forward now? And, you know, forever the UFO community has said, well, we need grade A direct eyewitnesses to this stuff taking place, and now they have them, and all of a sudden everybody in the UFO community is all suspicious about them. Well, can it really have it both ways? If there are real whistleblowers out there and these guys are presenting the credentials to prove that they are who they say they are, then you have little choice but to at least engage in the idea that they are in fact telling the truth, and that this is what it appears to be, which is a rolling disclosure. I think it'll still turn into a catastrophic disclosure. That's something that's talked about. A lot of people don't believe in catastrophic disclosure. And that's a lot of people in groups that I traffic in. You know, we're all paranormal investigators and UFO people, and we've been doing this for 20, 30 years, and we hunt Bigfoot in the field, and we do all of that stuff. And we sometimes forget that we live in a world that is vastly populated with people who have never even entertained the notion that it could all be real. Never even entertained the notion. And for them, yes, a full disclosure of what they are now referring to as non-human intelligences will be catastrophic. So I still predict that that's going to take place. Daily Express is also talking about this documentary, featuring a picture of Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State. And, Marco Rubio in the past has publicly said a number of times, which I have personally witnessed on the news, that not only does he believe that there is a cover-up taking place, but that he intends to get to the bottom of it. When you have that going on with the head of the CIA roughly saying the same thing, and a president who seems to be willing to let them spill the beans, this could all be building up into something really huge, something monumental. It'll be the biggest acceptance, let's call it that. It'll be the biggest acceptance of reality, of the truth in human history. It'll be the biggest story in human history, but that story has actually been going on for a very long time. And people are just now beginning to, they're either waking up to the reality of it, or they're going to have a sort of forced interaction with the reality of it. One of those two takes place. So, Fox News says Trump vows answers on mystery drone sightings as expert makes eerie prediction. And that's an interesting article. Again, people are beginning to suspect that even the new administration really doesn't have a handle on what's happening with the drones. It's something I covered extensively before. There are a number of conspiracy theories going on around the drones that are flying, but the one that makes the most sense is that they're flying them to cover up the sheer amount of alien craft that are in our skies currently. And the fact is there's an enormous UFO flap taking place. But I've probably failed to mention, but tonight's topic is going to be Bigfoot. We're going to talk about the current state of the mystery. But I wanted to go through a few of these articles with you guys because I know how easy it is to go through the week without seeing any of this stuff. One of the more interesting articles is being run by The Hill. Talks about how Chuck Schumer, who everybody knows is, a diehard Democrat and professed enemy of the current administration, but he's calling on Trump to declassify all files on UFOs. So you have a bipartisan move, it appears. There are other Democrats, Adam Schiff even, who want full UFO disclosure. And let's not forget that it was the Democratic Senator Harry Reid who, before he passed, really got this ball rolling. So that's really interesting stuff, guys. Get ready for some interesting times ahead. As I previously stated on another episode, the ongoing predictions from the webbot we're keep an eye out for. That was the drones were pretty much predicted as being seen as in the skies long enough that it ends up turning into what is described as a melee. That's the word that the webbot actually uses. Melee would infer some type of conflict taking place. And, that's interesting because listening to the interview between Ross Coulthart and the new UFO whistleblower eyewitness, Jake Barber, who actually picked the craft up for the United States government, he got the overwhelming feeling that there wasn't anything to fear. In fact, he even used the word love, that he felt like there was love coming from this non-human intelligence when he was retrieving these craft. Take that for what you will. Sort of coincides with Dr. Greer's, philosophy that the ET presence is a completely benign one. I am a follower of all of the research for the last 40 years dealing with alien abduction, so it's a hard sell for me to believe that it's all benign, but it's worth noting that a guy who claims he was the guy who picked up the craft, that's the feeling he got. So that's the kind of information that we have here on the PIA radio. And what else did Coulthard say that was interesting? Yes. So the Green Beret that everybody knows came out on the Sean Ryan podcast, his name is Michael Herrera, talked about the fact that he personally eyewitnessed a UFO where he and his team of special forces soldiers were actually overtaken by another group of soldiers who came out of the jungle around them dressed in black uniforms with no insignia but with American accents and speaking English. Got the drop on them, disarmed all of these Green Berets, but in the distance they could see a hovering UFO. And they also saw a platform in which Herrera describes people inside of what he thought were some type of crate being loaded into the bottom of this craft. That's interesting because Coulthard sources, and when he talked to Barber about this, told him that the crates described by Herrera seemed to be spot on for what he knew to exist in the program as being these little isolation pods. Now, this is where things get really weird. So the craft, and this is a theme now which is being echoed by a number of these main journalists involved with the UFO, UAP programs, are telling us that these craft, according to the people who have operated around and on them, are psionically controlled. They don't have control panels inside them with a joystick that lets you fly the thing around. It doesn't work that way. These craft work through a mind interface with the occupant of the craft in such a way that the mental thoughts of the pilot themselves actually control the craft. That's fascinating. So he claims that he has direct knowledge that, in fact, and there's a new book out there, and it's called Above Deep Black, which everybody should check out and read. But they talk about the idea that for a while now, there has been a program taking place in the United States being run by the U.S. military and intelligence services that targets gifted and talented students in various school systems around the country who may have heightened psionic abilities, and that they are then recruiting these kids into the UAP program in order to help them operate the craft. Apparently, there has something to do with the larger basal ganglia nerves that end up, some individuals have this and some of them do not, but the ones that do apparently are the ones that have a heightened ability to control these craft. They've not had much of a breakthrough, according to Coulthard sources, in the actual fabric science behind the craft, how they're actually fabricated. that process appears to be thousands and thousands of years ahead of anything that we could actually build. But certain human individuals apparently do have the psychic ability, the psionic ability, as the military puts it, to control these craft. And tonight's topic, we're going to be talking about the 800-pound gorilla and the cryptozoological world. And I'm talking about Bigfoot. And we'll discuss that right after our break.
Not on my watch, our military service members say, as they volunteer to serve. Not on my watch, they say, as they leave their families behind to keep the rest of ours safe. As they move out, stand firm, and take fire. So not on our watch, we say, to the severely ill or injured veterans who can't get the care they deserve, the therapists they need to walk again, the treatment they need to talk again, the lifetime of day-to-day help they need to live full and independent lives. When there's no more government funding, or a nursing home seems like the only option, or everyone says there's no hope for recovery, we won't leave one warrior behind. Not on our watch. Find out how you can do your part at findwwp.org.
In deep dark wood where shadows lie, Bigfoot sneaks with piercing eyes, footprints large in the silent night, a beast untamed, he's out of sight. A chilling ground, your blood does stir. Strange creatures on a restless night disappear with fading light. Time slips and it's out of time. Mysteries in the forest ride. Wonder where the pines grow tall. Echoes from another age crawl. Time bends twisting the whispering leaves. Who knows what love, what deceit. Lost in fog, we drift away. Different world in the light of day. Past and present blend as one. In the forest where there's no sun. Ghostly visions, they come and go. Secrets hidden we may not know. Dormant flowers, Bigfoot roams. In these woods they make their homes. Strange creatures on a restless night disappear with the fading light. Time slips, take us out of time. Mysteries in the forest ride. Rise. Wonder where the pines grow tall. Echoes from another age call. Time bends twisted, whispering leaves. Who knows what the forest ride? Mysteries in the forest ride. Wonder where the pines grow tall. Echoes from another age call. Time bends twist in the whispering leaves. Who knows what lurks, what deceives. Lost in fog, we drift away. Different world in the light of day. Past and present blend as one. In the forest where there's no sun. Ghostly visions, they come and go. Secrets hidden we may not know. Dogman prowls, Bigfoot roams. In these woods they make their homes.
All right, guys, we are back from our radio break, and this is Jack Carey. I'm your host here at Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio, if you're just tuning in. And we were covering paranormal in the news, talking about Ross Coulthard, talking about, well, there's the sheer amount of UAP/UFO stuff going on. And there was one last article I forgot to share with you guys coming out of Bro Bible, and it has the headline, Republican Congressman Exposes a Government Conspiracy to Cover Up Underwater Alien Bases Buried in the Earth's Ocean. And come to find out, this is Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett. He's been quite vocal over the past few weeks to the last few months, and here he is actually saying that he fully believes that there are alien bases in the oceans and that fact has been covered up. And I believe he's telling the truth. The real question is, what are we going to do about it? Once you get everybody to sort of say, yeah, oh my God, they're really there. What are people going to do about it? That's going to be, we have a very interesting future ahead of us, guys. Very, very interesting. But tonight's topic, it occurred to me over the past few weeks that on this particular radio show, since we started the show, we've not talked about the king of the cryptids, at least in North America, I would argue around the world, and that is Bigfoot. And I have had the honor and privilege of having gone on many a successful expedition in the past whereby physical evidence was in fact recovered, some of it profound physical evidence. And I thought we would talk about just the state of the overall mystery of the Bigfoot phenomenon itself. Now, last week and the week prior, I mentioned Dogman. I touched on the Dogman subject along with aliens on the moon. And I mentioned that, you can take the two mysteries and write down the facts of all the mysteries on paper. And if you didn't describe on paper the head of the creature, one being dog-headed, the other looking more like a primate, then you really have a hard time telling the difference between the two mysteries. That's until you look a little closer and you realize that in a lot of Dogman cases, there are cases where the creature is literally within the boundaries of the city, let's say. With Bigfoot, not so much. You get an occasional report of one of them careening through a small mountain town once in a while at 3 a.m., throwing garbage cans at the trucks and dogs that are barking at it and things like that. But that's about as close as you get to a city encounter with a Bigfoot. Dogman, you get some crazy reports of people that encounter them within city limits, let's say, in civilization. And that's the primary difference between the two. Other than that, they both leave physical trace evidence at the scene in the form of footprints, and now we know DNA, which some DNA has been apparently recovered and studied by Dr. Melba Ketchum. And I'll get to that in a little bit because it does hold a relationship to the Bigfoot phenomenon. But The interesting thing right now is that the Bigfoot phenomenon, other than a couple of teams out there in the world, really is at kind of a standstill. And it has been for a while. And if you visit online Bigfoot forums and communities, you'll notice an overwhelming theme in most of them. And that overwhelming theme is one of infighting and vitriolic, back and forth between people who hold different ideologies according to what they believe these creatures are. In my investigations, the preponderance of evidence led me to believe that they are in fact a chimera construction, something which I chronicle in my book, Bigfoot Unleashed, for those of you out there that are readers and like books to hold and read when you're going to bed at night. Check out my book, Bigfoot Unleashed. I talk all about, extensively about some of the expeditions that we went on. But I also talked about a UFO connection, apparent connection, or let's just call it a non-human intelligence, the way that the military likes to refer to it. There's a non-human intelligence connected to the dogman phenomenon. It shows up too often in the periphery of the phenomenon, not to have some sort of causal relationship to it. And this brings me to one of the expeditions I went on with the late, great, world famous J.C. Johnson, who may have been the greatest cryptozoologist that really ever lived. And we were on an expedition in the Chusca Mountains, and we had guides that were trackers with us that were from the Navajo Nation, because it's all hundreds and hundreds of miles of reservation land covering very large mountains that have boreal forest on them that are surrounded by vast amounts of desert. It's really a crazy place to go and to visit. And in the Chusca Mountains, we were investigating a number of sightings coming from the Navajo people who called the creature Yaetzo. And while we were combing the countryside, and this is brutal, brutal country. You're talking, if you've never been on Navajo reservation land before, let me tell you, most of the roads take a extremely big, heavy-duty 4x4 like truck to even traverse them. That's if you're lucky. Usually the roads turn into more of just a trail where horses are the name of the game. And we were on horseback going through this area because, you couldn't get our cars back there. And we came across approximately 200-yard track line of Bigfoot tracks that were 19-inch footprints. And these tracks had about a 6-foot stride in between them. Now, this was a field where it went on for hundreds and hundreds of yards, and the topography of the field was constant. It was static. It didn't change. It was the same sort of heavy, sandy, loamy topsoil with scrub brush and stuff sticking up through it. And about halfway through the track line, the stride of the creature changed almost instantly from 6 feet to 10 feet. And the footprint right before the stride changed was deeply dug in. And that told our trackers and JC that this thing had taken off running at that stage. And it's here that I remind everybody that you're talking about a creature with a 19-inch footprint out literally in the middle of nowhere. If there's a middle of nowhere, that was it. In its prime habitat, an apex predator that probably weighed 800 to 1,000 pounds, probably stood 8 to 10 feet tall. Just a brute of a creature. And yet, something spooked it to the point where it took off running in the middle of that field. And this is where things really get strange. So as we approach the end of the track line, all of a sudden the prints just stop right in the middle of the field. And we're thinking to ourselves, well, J.C. Johnson started shaking his head and he looked down just in disbelief. And I started shaking my head in disbelief and I looked up because I instinctively knew that whatever spooked a creature like that had come from the sky. And being a paranormal investigator and having been called in on a number of his cases where cryptozoology sort of stretched the line between paranormal and the cryptozoology world, I had studied alien abduction. And I knew that from the Sasquatch Genome Project, which I'm going to get to in a moment, that these creatures apparently share some modern human DNA. And let's face it, if humans were being abducted for their DNA as part of some sort of vast DNA program conducted by the NHI, the non-human intelligence aliens, space aliens that are operating on this planet, then is it too much of a stretch to think that they were also abducting these creatures because they too possessed some human DNA? And perhaps their DNA is even more valuable. It was the late, great Jonathan Keel who wrote the Mothman Prophecies, who was also a Bigfoot investigator and major UFO investigator who originally noticed that in 20% of all highly credible Bigfoot sightings, a UFO or anomalous light was also reported at the scene at the same time. That's interesting because of this similarity between the two phenomenon of the Dogman and of Sasquatch. Now, I was part of a team with J.C. Johnson and Dr. Christopher Dyer from he was the executive director of the University of New Mexico at the time. The famous explorer, treasure hunter, and cryptozoologist Robert Kreider was with us on this expedition, and we were called to a mountain area in northern New Mexico, right on the northern New Mexico-Colorado border, where two separate groups of Navajo Nation Native Americans on tribal land actually witnessed these creatures, and I mean Yayatso or Bigfoot, leaving physical DNA at the scene. In other words, we had eyewitnesses to Bigfoot leaving DNA at a scene. Not one, but two of them came into us within a 24-hour period, separated by an 80-mile distance. And we were able to get the director from the University of New Mexico to go with us to oversee the collection of that DNA. And he did so. Those samples were entered in with about 100 other samples from around the country that all went into the Sasquatch Genome Project that was headed up by Dr. Melba Ketchum, who later was derided by the established scientific community as being a charlatan scientist, when in fact she's anything but. And her work was highly credible, but they could not stomach the results of her work, and therefore basically, ridiculed her and ran her into the ground. And that's what became of the Sasquatch Genome Project. But we discovered a lot of profound truths during that time period. And one of those is the fact that there is a thing called the World Genetic Bank. And anytime a DNA sample is collected by genetic scientists somewhere in the world off of a deceased or living specimen, it is submitted to the World Genetic Bank, who then tests that DNA, maps it, and it gets filed away. And so any other geneticist working around the world, when they get a sample, they get the sample and they compare that sample to all of the known signatures that have been recorded in the World Genetic Bank. And if they don't get a match, in other words, if a specimen has never been collected for them to get a match, they will naturally, as they did in the case of the Sasquatch Genome Project, assume that all of the samples are contaminated. And that's exactly what happened. And the fact is that the Genome Project proved that the mitochondrial DNA, which is the maternal lineage of the creatures, has modern human DNA. That's just a fact. That was recorded over all of the samples that were proved to be real samples of Bigfoot DNA taken by numerous investigators over the entirety of the country. It had mitochondrial DNA. Well, it also seemed to show a chimera fusion of other kinds of genes from a wide variety of species fused into the Sasquatch or Bigfoot DNA in such a way that it was way beyond any sort of laboratory chimera work that humans could comprehend or even reproduce. And it's interesting because just last year, the year before, a team of scientists from around the world all worked together, and they were able to actually create chimeras out of chimpanzee embryos. They were able to actually fertilize embryos with human DNA that came from a chimpanzee. They allowed them to live for, I think, 18 days before they destroyed the embryos, but we're already doing that kind of work. What this Genome Project kind of showed was the fact that this was the same idea, but taken place on a much, much more advanced level. And this leads us back into ancient history, into the Sumerian tablets, their interaction with the Anunnaki, the idea that they recorded that the Anunnaki did genetic experimentations on life forms on the planet. And it is possible that the Sumerian story of Utnapishtim or Gilgamesh and the creature called Enkidu may have been the story of genetic manipulation into the species, because Enkidu is a clear description of a modern day Bigfoot. He's a fully hairy, wild man of the wilderness that has all of these abilities, and that comes from 12,000-year-old writings. The same writings that seem to detail a genetic interaction, a genetic manipulation of the human species. Could it be that they took some human DNA, mixed it with the DNA of a living primate at that time to produce what we today call the Sasquatch species? That's the premise of my book, Bigfoot Unleashed, and I present the evidence for that. But getting back to the DNA and the two mysteries side by side, a researcher claims to have successfully retrieved Dogman DNA. That Dogman DNA was then given to Dr. Melba Ketchum. She was able to isolate that DNA, the mitochondrial, and what she discovered was the same exact thing, that it appears as though the mitochondrial DNA from the Dogman DNA was in fact modern day human. That's fascinating, because then you might be showing a side-by-side process. If they did it with one creature, might they have done it with another? And you have all of this information that's been out there for a while in the Bigfoot Sasquatch community, and yet you still have this sort of army of believers out there who hold the notion that these creatures are just another dumb great ape lumbering around the wildernesses of North America, and I might add every other continent on the planet. And therein lies a major biological problem with the mystery itself. In no case in biology, except for two different species, do we have an example of a species or variation of a species appearing on all land masses at the same time. Right now, there's a species of bird that can be found on every continent, and there's a species of dung beetle that can be found on every continent. That's it. There's absolutely no examples whatsoever of a primate-like species being able to appear on all continents simultaneously, even though they are slight variations of one another. You have the Yowie in Australia, you have the Yeren in China, you have the Yeti in the Himalayas. You even have sightings of Bigfoot in the UK. And when you talk to UK witnesses, they're every bit as worked up and convinced that what they saw was a Bigfoot as an American witness, even though in America we have 97 million uninhabited heavily forested acres for them to roam around in. In the UK, not so much. You would think that a living, breathing, genetically viable species, if that's in fact what they were, traveling in family units in the UK, would be an easy discovery. They don't have the vast expanses of forest like we have in North America. So how do you go about explaining that? And that is part and parcel of the mystery itself. And, you know, the community's just beginning to be forced to take some of this into account. The other thing is that there's a lot of evidence to show that they are in fact feeding, breeding, and thriving in the wildernesses of North America. I mean, we do have many, many eyewitnesses and in fact really good video showing them in family units. So this is a species that travels in family units. It's a species that apparently does something with their dead, which is why we don't come across their bodies in the wild. And that's profound. When you do something with your dead, that's religion. And you have a species with a blended genetics that allow them to do exactly what they do, which is to remain undiscovered. They are so genetically superior to anything else in the forest that nothing even comes close. And I talk about this in the Bigfoot conferences that I talk at every year, that when you look at biology and the animal record anywhere in the world, you have all of these incredible creatures with incredible abilities, right? Every species has a different set of genetic abilities programmed by their genetics to allow them to do what they do. That's no different in the Bigfoot species. This is a species with genetics that allow them to run We approximate 75 miles an hour over uneven, mountainous, heavily forested terrain. Cheetah speed. Imagine that. They can see you from 2 miles away. They can smell you from 3 miles away. They can hear you from 4 miles away. Those might be slight exaggerations, but you see what I'm getting at. This is a species with the genetic ability that if it wants to remain hidden, can and does so successfully. How and why it's able to also do those same kinds of things in areas like the UK is something that is part of the deeper part of this mystery that we keep exploring called Bigfoot. But this has been another episode of Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio. Join us next week as we jump down another rabbit hole, guys. And I will see you then. Until then, keep watching the skies for those mysterious drones and, well, the occasional alien craft, apparently.